Hi everyone, it's Lisa, and the date is January the 1st, 2021. So happy New Year. Here's what I've been working on. I'm out of crackers and I didn't want to go to the store just to get snack food. I haven't been shopping since before Christmas. And I'm going to try to hang on until next week and go then. And in the meantime, I wanted to try to bake these things just as a way to see if I could pull it off. These are crackers that are based on these things called Bath Oliver biscuits. And the real Bath Olivers are in the upper left corner here, and the ones I made are in the lower right-hand corner, so a lot lumpier and less symmetrical. Bath Olivers are kind of a cracker, actually, that was invented back in the mid-1700s by a doctor named William Oliver in this town called Bath in England. Now, if you've read Jane Austen's books, you'd probably recognize the name of the town. And it's actually, the crackers themselves have come up in books a number of times. So Rudyard Kipling wrote about them. They also show up in Brideshead Revisited, and I think other books that Evelyn Waugh did as well have them. And I heard about them in one of Michael Bond's books. Now, Michael Bond's famous for writing about Paddington Bear, but it wasn't the Paddington book where I heard about them. It was a book about a mouse that he'd called Thursday. And in the story, Thursday and his family get stranded, and the only food they've got is Bath Oliver. So I always kind of grew up thinking, oh, this is like this really special thing that could be really handy if you're in a difficult situation. Anyway, so the problem with making crackers yourself is that you can roll the bread dough out really thin and you can bake it for a long time and they can get crunchy, but they're also really hard. And that's not good because you could break a tooth on them and then you'd have to go to the dentist, which is at the best of times inconvenient. And right now it's like it could be a real problem. So here's how to make them so they're crunchy, but also tend to crumble a bit more like real store-bought crackers. And the recipe's from this woman in New Zealand, Alexa Johnston, and it involves using what we know about this thing called exponential growth. Now, you've heard about that term a lot in the past year. Certainly, there's been a lot of reports about that in terms of COVID-19 and the spread of the coronavirus to the population, and a lot of articles about this exponential growth curve on the virus and what to do about it. And unfortunately, here's the curve from the UK, their caseload in the early part of last year. You can see this very characteristic curve as it heads upward like that, a very sharp angle. So it's something that really is a major part of learning about biology. So I want to try to make it a bit more positive and to say, well, how can we actually use this concept for this practical issue right here, which is how do we put air bubbles or air pockets into the dough of these crackers? They don't have to be very big, but you need to have a lot of those things in there to make it light and easy to eat. So this is how we're going to do it. We've got two different ways in which we're going to use exponential growth. One is through this leavening agent. They often use soda to put air bubbles into cookies, but we're going to use yeast. And the second way in which we use exponential growth is we're going to fold the dough many times to make a lot of thin layers. And that's going to add more air to the whole biscuit. So what you need for this is some warm water, yeast. I use Fleischmann's, this is traditional yeast. I've used quick rise in the past, but this seems to work just as well. Butter, or I've also been experimenting with this plant-based alternative to butter. And I'm using this brand because it's got this kind of rainforest-friendly logo on it. So I figure, because I'm concerned about the deforestation in the tropics, to make palm oil, which is a major component of these kinds of shortenings. Milk, we could probably use soy or nut types of milk. I've been using this regular powdered milk since the spring because it keeps longer than actual milk in cartons. Salt, and also this thing called strong white flour, the 2.5 to 3 cups of it. I wasn't really sure what they meant by that, but I guess strong flour in the UK and also in New Zealand means what they call high protein flour, which is used for making bread. And thanks to Dan Leopard's site for explaining this in more detail. So strong flour is made from what they call hard wheat, which has lots of protein in it, and therefore there's a lot of gluten being produced in the baked goods from that. Now, it turns out that Canada makes a lot of hard wheat because we grow it here, and so our flour, even the all-purpose kinds of flour, tends to have a relatively high amount of protein. So Canadian all-purpose flour will work for this recipe. I've tried it, but it may not be quite the same if you're in the States or in England. So that's what I've been finding out here. It seems to work all right with our all-purpose flour in Canada, but I can't vouch for other parts of the world. So here's how we do it. You're going to sprinkle a teaspoon of yeast onto a couple of tablespoons of warm water and just kind of let it sit there to get the yeast growing. I like to add a bit of sugar in with that so that it gives the yeast something to feed on more rapidly. When you're waiting for the yeast to start growing and doing its exponential curve thing, you're going to do this other thing first. You're going to heat 50 grams or like a quarter of a cup of butter with some milk, 150 milliliters of milk, and a bit of salt, just a half teaspoon of salt. And you can do it on the stove top in a pan, or you can use a bowl in the microwave. Just 2 minutes on high will be enough to melt that butter. So here I'm putting it in the microwave here, the milk and butter and salt. And here's how it comes out. It's all melted together. And so I had to let it cool off a bit. But when it cools off enough to touch, you can stir in the yeast mixture. So you add them together, and then you also add in a half cup or so of flour, and let's mix it together until it's smooth. It's still going to be kind of liquidy, not anywhere near a dough. So just at that stage, you put a plate or a lid on top of it, and just leave it somewhere like in a warm place. I tend to use top of the fridge because it's quiet and warm up there for about 10 minutes. Actually, I left it there longer because I was marking papers, and that means that that's probably why my biscuits got really fluffy and sort of expanded more than they probably should have. Anyway, so here's what it looks like when it's kind of mixed together a little bit more like that. And so I left it up there for that time to sit for a while. And then after that, I got the bowl down and I mixed in the rest of the flour. So you add that flour in, mix it together really well with a spatula or wooden spoon. And this, you can see in the picture it's starting to develop these threads. I'm told that's the gluten starting to form. So you keep mixing in that flour until it's a soft dough. Now, if it's really sloppy, you'll probably need to add a bit more flour in. Or conversely, if the mixture is really dry and it's not behaving like a dough, you'll probably have to put a bit more warm water in, to make it really kind of mixed together. So kind of adjust it according to how you feel and just eyeball the situation. Once you got that dough kind of together, start to knead it. So here's what it should look like. It should be all kind of cohesive. So start to knead the dough, and that'll help the gluten strands stick together. And as you do that, the dough is going to become a lot smoother and silkier. So once it's reached that stage, you'll cover the dough in the bowl with a damp cloth and just let it sit somewhere warm for 15 minutes or just on the countertop for about an hour at room temperature. So at that stage, you're ready to start rolling the dough out. So put some flour on the surface. It could be a counter, or I'm using a cutting board on the counter here. And I've got a rolling pin, so I just rolled the dough out. I had to actually do it in 2 pieces because it's a fairly small surface. So I cut off a piece of the dough and I rolled it out and tried to make it somewhat rectangular because it'll be easier for the next step that way, and about 1/2 inch thick. So I just rolled it out like that. And having it rectangular helps with trying to fold the dough. So sprinkle the flattened dough with a bit of flour so it doesn't stick, and then fold the dough into thirds. This is what they call a turn. And so the first fold like that, like you're putting stuff in an envelope, basically. 1/3 and then other on top of it like that. So the second fold, so you've got these 3 layers at this stage. Then you use the rolling pin to flatten out the dough again, roll it out flat, and then you repeat, you fold it again. So you repeat the folding and rolling steps. And Alexa Johnston's recipe says that it may get kind of rubbery, when you're rolling it out like that. If it's kind of snapping back into place and not flattening out, just put the damp cloth on and leave it for 5 to 10 minutes, and it's going to what they call rest or relax the dough, and then you can come back to it and keep rolling it. Now, Miss Johnston says that she usually does 6 turns. Her recipe says 8 or 9, but she says it works just as well with 6. And I can see why, because 3 layers each time, 3 times 3 times 3 times 3 times 3 times 3, that's 700 plus layers. And that's a lot for a 1/4 inch cracker, so coming along there. And it really speeds things up to have 3 instead of 2 layers. Now, just as an example of exponential growth, if you ask somebody to fold this standard sheet of office paper 10 times, do it when they're drunk because they won't be thinking straight at that point. And you can actually get money out of them. They'll be folding the paper and they won't really be able to do that 10 times because in fact, the Guinness record for paper folding is 12 times. And it's only doable when you have a very thin or a very large piece of paper to go that high. And this is the record 12 folds held by Brittany Gallivan of the US. So that's just an example of this exponential growth thing. I mean, it starts out small, but you keep folding it over like that, and you get lots and lots of layers. And you can do it with the dough because we can roll it down flat after each of these turns. If we couldn't do that, then it would be really hard to fold it. So when you've got the dough flattened out like that, use a cookie or biscuit cutter 2 or 3 inches across to cut the crackers out. I've been using this round biscuit cutter, but any other shape or just cutting it into squares with a knife would probably work just fine. And then when you get the shapes cut out, you arrange them on a wet cookie sheet or baking parchment like here. And then you poke holes in it. And so that's just to let the air out. So you prick the crackers with a fork or the blunt end of a bamboo skewer, as Ms. Johnston suggests. You bake it for 20-something minutes at 325 degrees Fahrenheit. You may need to move the trays around a bit in the oven. And the crackers may not go brown all the way. They may brown at the bottom, but not on the top. But they should be crisp. You may have to leave them in there a bit longer with the heat turned down to get them to really crisp up a bit at that stage. I've tried to roll the bits of leftover dough into new crackers, but it doesn't work very well. So just cut the dough scraps into small pieces, kind of like this, and you can just make them like pretzels, basically. You can just bake them in the oven along with the crackers, and they make nice little snacks. You can add flavor to the leftover bits or the crackers themselves by brushing them with some water and sprinkle on some seasoning like sea salt or pepper or grated cheese, that kind of thing. Here, I'm just putting on a bit of water here with this pastry brush and then sprinkling on some black pepper, just for flavoring like that. And it works really well. So to recap, we use exponential growth a couple of times in the recipe. One, we use yeast, which is often used as an example of exponential growth in biology. And two, using those turns to fold the dough. And you can see that the Johnston method only takes a bit more work to get those 3 layers, but it's so much faster than just folding it in half. It ends up being much more efficient that way. And this just shows that we worry about exponential growth for sure. We think, gosh, is there anything we can do about it? Well, there's lots of things we can do. We know there's things we can do with the coronavirus to slow down the spread so that you don't have this massive surge. You can actually keep the growth down to a level where it's manageable rather than have it completely explode. So it's exponential, yeah, but you can still do something about it, is the point. Also linked with coronavirus is apparently they had to shut down the Bath Oliver factory temporarily, so it's hard to get the biscuits now. But now we know how to make them ourselves, so we can still do that. All these people in the UK writing these annoyed letters to the editor saying, we can't get our Bath Oliver biscuits, what's going on? But now we know what to do about that. So here's the bits and pieces of leftover dough, and here are the finished biscuits, and you can see. So I'm going to actually have some of these with this British cheese called Double Gloucester. They recommend Stilton, but they didn't have Stilton at the Fairway, so I'll have Double Gloucester instead. Anyway, all right. Take care and have a good day.